because on Friday, President Trump issued pardons for 2 Army officers accused of war crimes in Afghanistan and restored the rank of a Navy SEAL who was acquitted of murder in Iraq. The officers include First Lieutenant Clint Lorance, who has served 6 years of a 19-year sentence on 2 charges of second-degree murder and obstruction of justice after ordering his soldiers to open fire on 3 unarmed men in Afghanistan, killing 2 of them. He had been convicted in 2013. The other was Pardon Officer Mathew Golsteyn, who is a West Point graduate who was awaiting trial. I don't understand why news organizations like the Associated Press throw in West Point graduate there. Like, what's the point?
I think it's just one of those
More
things.
distinguished?
Well, it's like when a Marine does something and the local news like a Marine does this. It for whatever reason I think West Point. I think you hold them to like an even higher standard a little bit.
Right or wrong. It's just something that always identifies you.
So he has been suspected for allegedly murdering a suspect, Afghan bomb maker in 2010. The trial was scheduled for next year, so Goldstein hasn't even been on trial yet. The president also restored the rank of Special Warfare Operator Eddie Gallagher, a Navy SEAL, who was convicted of posing with a corpse of an enemy combatant in Iraq. I think that greatly diminishes like what actually happened with the Eddie Gallagher case. That one like encapsulated the military community as well. To say that his trial was only about taking a picture completely ignores a lot of the facts and what happened in that trial. We're not going to get into those. We've talked about Mathew Golsteyn. We've talked about Eddie Gallagher in past podcasts. If you want to search for it, it's going to be in the bio there. You can hear our thoughts about those 2 cases. The only thing that I'll say about it is Golsteyn had never been convicted of anything. He was granted clemency before he even went to trial. I think that's very different. I think Eddie Gallagher was acquitted of what he was accused of doing, and I think that bears some weight, because if you just if you take the things on their face from a legal perspective, the only thing he was found guilty of doing was taking his picture with a corpse. If on its face, if he only did that, he would not have been busted down from chief to first-class petty officer, because as military listeners know, it is very difficult to bust down an E7 and all the other branches except for the Marine Corps, E6 and the Marine Corps. It's hard to break them down in a rank. So I have no problem with President Trump restoring the rank of Eddie Gallagher. I don't. I don't have any problem with clemency because that's well in his rights. I think the other case is a little bit different. Like, it's a little bit different, and we're going to tell you why. Kate, can you walk us through this?
Yeah, and this is a write-up from the Army Times. Shortly after the soldiers from 4th Squadron, 73rd Cavalry Regiment set out on patrol from Strong Point, Pyanzi, Afghanistan, a motorcycle carrying 3 Afghan men came into view. PFC James Skelton reported the sighting to First Lieutenant Clint Lorance, his new platoon leader. He told me to engage, Skelton said. So Skelton fired 2 shots, and he missed. The motorcycle came to a stop. The men climbed off and began walking towards the Army National soldiers who were in front of the U.S. Afghan patrol. The ANA, the Afghan Army, started telling them to go back, waving to them to return towards the motorcycle and stay away, Skelton testified. They turned around and went back towards the motorcycle. So they were listening. They were following the orders. But within seconds, 2 of them were dead, and the 3rd man had run away. A gun truck that was accompanying the soldiers on foot had opened fire with its M240 Bravo machine gun. He was told to engage by Lieutenant Lorance when they had a visual, Skelton testified. Did he ask the vehicle what the men were doing? The prosecutor asked. No, Skelton said. He just told them to engage? The prosecutor asked. Yes, Skelton said. 1 year after that fateful July 2nd day on 2012, in a case that has been controversial from the start, Lorance was convicted of 2 counts of murder and 1 account of attempted murder. Lorance was serving a 19-year prison sentence at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, but his case is far from over. Some people see him as a patriot unfairly punished for actions taken to protect his fellow soldiers. His own soldiers, however, paint a much different picture. They claim their platoon leader was ignorant, overzealous, and out of control, that he hated the Afghan people, and that he had spent recent days tormenting the locals and issuing death threats.
All right, I want to stop right there because I think that that's an important part to go over. There's been a lot of talk. Even Lieutenant Lorance has gone on Fox News. He went and had like a 45-minute long speech, and he started to talk about some general officers and how they lost touch and how there was political reasons behind it. I think it's important to realize and to mention it wasn't a general that brought these charges. It was a staff sergeant in the Army. It was his platoon leader that said that this was murder. And so many of his other soldiers, like his fellow platoon mates, said that this was murder. This is a very, very different story than what's being portrayed right now in the media. Cons, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it just seems to me that it's pretty clear that the rules of engagement and the escalation of force was just completely abandoned. And I can tell you from experience, being a young lieutenant and being new to country and new to your platoon, the scariest thing, I think, is that you will be put in a situation, or your soldiers will be put in a situation where they could potentially be harmed. And I've always said the hardest thing for me going to Iraq was the potential that I was going to have to bring somebody home in a body bag and then tell their parents that I let them down. So that's constantly in your mind, in play for you when you're leading men. And again, you can train and train and train, and you can know the rules of engagement, but you have to have that intestinal fortitude to follow that when you're put in a position that you have to act. And that's tough for a young guy, a young lieutenant. It's very tough to act when potentially that could be Afghans with weapons, or they're coming up fast and they're not stopping. That can almost freeze you right in your tracks. So from that perspective, I get where he's coming from. However, for him to just say engage right away when he wasn't aware of anything that they were doing that was warranting that they were engaged on, kind of just blows me away.
Well, and let's be honest, we've all talked about it before. Whenever you're dealing with this time frame in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, every single troop who went there was frustrated with the rules of engagement.
Yeah,
it was
for
very,
sure.
very difficult. Like, you had to have multiple layers of positive identification, which was bullshit. Like, I really believe that was bullshit, because you had to wait. If somebody even had a weapon, they had to be pointing it at you and engage before you can engage in some areas. Mm-hmm. That was very, very tough to deal with.
Where I was, you couldn't do anything until they were shooting at you. That was it. Yeah. Your hands were tied until you were fucked, essentially, which I get. And like you said, Cons, one of the scariest things is, you're responsible for this group, and especially as a young lieutenant. And in the days leading up to him taking over, his platoon has sustained 4 casualties. So they take 4 casualties, and then he gets there. And among the wounded was his predecessor, who took shrapnel wounds to the abdomen, his limbs, his eyes, his face, when an IED went off. So that's the kind of environment
all in the back of your mind.
He came. So the platoon was already on high alert when he came and took over. And that's when the motorcycle drove up.
And I would say even more than the back. I think it's in the forefront of your mind. And I was kind of in the same position. I'm not as a lieutenant, but the dog handler that was with the reconnaissance battalion before me, he was killed by a rocket before I took over. I knew everywhere I was going that possibly could be me too. Like, that you're in that position, and to wrap your brain around that as a young guy. I mean, I think he was 28 at the time, but still a relatively young man going through everything, trying to have your brain wrapped around is a difficult process. It just flat out is.
And right from the start, it showed that he was having trouble finding that balance of getting his men to trust him and getting the respect of the locals. And so an example, one of his first days there, he gets there right after they take 4 casualties, including the guy he's replacing. And so right after that, and before the motorcycle incident, a man who was a farmer and his child, who was about 4 years old, they came up to the gate. And a lot of times locals would come up to the gates of these FOBs with issues and problems, because there was kind of a rapport. We were trying to build that, like, as cliche
Win
as
the
it is,
hearts and minds,
whatever. Yeah. So they come up if they have a problem. So this man and his 4-year-old come up to the gate, and they talk to the Americans about concertina wire that was blocking access to his farm field. He's like, I'm trying to farm here. Your guys' concertina wire is fucking me up. So apparently he says, in response, he says, you move the C wire, I'll have somebody kill you. And this was according to other soldiers who were at the scene. So that's what Lorance said to them. Then he tried to have the Afghan turn in IEDs to the Americans. He was like, while you're here, you bring us IEDs, or we'll have the ANA kill your family. And Lieutenant Lorance also said, well, if we ever come onto your land and we step on an IED or we find one, we'll have the ANA come and kill your family. And he pointed to the kid and said, do you want to see your child grow up? So this is right before the motorcycle incident. This is the following day is when then he has marksman and his unit fire.
Because he was only with this unit in country for 3 days.
Right.
Let's keep that in mind. He was only in country for 3 days.
That's day one. Day two, he directs one of his platoon squad's designated marksmen to fire his M14 from one of Strongpoint's guard towers into the neighboring village. So he directs this harassing fire, which was illegal harassing fire at villagers. And he even directed the soldier to shoot near groups of people as well at walls and vehicles. So the specialist Mathew Rush was the soldier, and when he said to shoot near a group of children, he refused. He was like, no, I'm not doing that. These villagers were not doing anything. There was no demonstrated hostile intent. No one heard incoming shots, according to soldiers who were there. So basically, and a lot of these soldiers have spoken out to newspapers. One soldier said he was out of control. We told him, sir, I don't think it's a good idea. And he was like, oh, it's a great idea. We're going to scare these guys so that they actually attend our shura, our meeting, so we won't lose any more guys. So in his mind, he's like setting the tone, doing the right thing.
There's just so much wrong. You know, number one, being placed in charge of a platoon, having not trained with them at all, you're kind of being set up for failure, because in country, in combat, that's a hell of a way to develop a rapport with soldiers and with men and women that you have to lead. So, you know, shame on
this
whoever.
This is not World War II. Like,
right.
It's not World War II where the operational tempo dictates that you have to do that. You know?
Right.
Like when people were falling in the beaches of Normandy, a sergeant became the company commander just because everybody else was dead.
Right.
That's not the case here.
Yeah, and then just the fact that he had that sentiment about killing people, I can only assume that somewhere in his chain of command, no one heard that. Because if you're a battalion commander or if you're a company commander and you hear one of your lieutenants said that, you pull him out of the rotation immediately, sit down and talk to him and get an idea of where his head is at, because you cannot have people going outside the wire that are that thirsty for blood and that thirsty to just start killing people willy-nilly, because that's not effective, and two, that's just not how our military operates.
But a lot of times on these FOBs, maybe you'd have one or two lieutenants.
That's a good point.
You'd maybe only have one captain if you were lucky. Like
No,
those
you're absolutely right.
Kind of the top.
I was out on a cop that I had my commander, and that was it. And then I was the next highest ranking individual. So I understand that sometimes war dictates and these conflicts dictate that you can't follow the protocol in such a way, but that's just unacceptable to have those thoughts and say them out loud.
And then,
all right, let's keep moving through the event.
Yeah, so then that happens. He's directing the soldier to shoot into the village, and finally the soldier says, no more, I'm not shooting. There's kids out there. I'm not doing it. And in the report to file, because, you know, if you're firing, there's got to be a report done about it, he instructed another soldier to say that they had taken pot shots, which is just somebody puts a rifle over a wall, like Taliban fires one or two in your general direction. It's not like necessarily an attack or anything like that. But he says, say in the report that we took pot shots from the village and that's why we were shooting at them. And that soldier said, no, it's a false report. I'm not doing that. And
good on that soldier standing up to your higher ranking officer.
Sergeant Daniel Williams, he also testified that Lorance said he didn't really care about upsetting them, the locals, too much because he fucking hated them. So now the next day, as the soldiers prepared to head out on patrol, a small group of 3 or 4 Afghan men came to the gate again, and they're pissed. They're like, why the fuck were you guys shooting at us the day before? You guys are just shooting randomly into our thing.
Which is a fair question. That's
right,
a fair
yeah.
question.
Our kids are out here. Why are you doing that? So Lorance told them that if they had a problem, they could attend the shura, or the meeting he had planned to have later in the week. And again, that was something we did all the time to build like a sense of unity and to hear what are your gripes, what are your problems, how are you interpreting us being here, like how can we better communicate so that we can accomplish the mission. So you'd have these big shuras, these big meetings where the village leaders and the military leaders would talk, and the rest of the villagers, the male villagers, would hear it out. So this was him kind of like firing into the thing. If you want to know why we were shooting at you guys, come to our meeting. Really weird way to go about getting people to come to your meeting.
Right.
The Afghans refused to budge, and he told them to leave. He started aggressively yelling at them, and he started counting. and he pulled back the charging handle on his weapon and chambered a round.
That's terrible.
At these locals who came to say, hey, why were you shooting at us in the streets? As the soldier's interpreter panicked, one of the other soldiers testified the Afghans finally turned away and left.
You think?
Yeah. So the Americans and a squad of A&A soldiers began walking out on their patrol after that, and just moments into the patrol is when Skelton opened fire on the motorcycle, and then Private David Shiloh, operating the 240 Bravo, killed the 2 Afghans. So Fitzgerald, who left the Army in August, he is a soldier who was standing near Lorance when the men on the motorcycle were hit. And he says, I remember him asking, why isn't anybody firing yet? Basically, at this point, they're saying that these men were never any type of threat. They weren't coming at them. They were following orders. And then the patrol pushed into the village where the bodies were quickly surrounded by crying and upset villagers. From there, it just gets worse and worse.
Yeah, so you basically get the idea. You get the gist of what happened in the story. And that's why I say this one is drastically different. There's a conviction in place, 2 counts of second-degree murder. I don't think that that's something that you can overturn. Now, I do believe that there is elements where if you look at the case and you think that this is a one-time situation, let me phrase this correctly, because it's a very touchy
heavy,
subject,
yeah.
and it's happened to us before on podcasts where if we don't get the wording exactly right, then it'll come back and haunt us. I want to say this exactly perfectly. There is a difference in saying he saw the guy that he took his spot die. He was mentally affected to the point where he made a terrible decision, and that there is extenuating circumstances for what happened. And because of that, we're going to commute his service or commute his sentence. That's what happened with Chelsea Manning. Although it's a very different situation, Chelsea Manning was not pardoned. Her sentence was commuted. A pardon is very different. A pardon is saying to the American people, this never happened. There was nothing wrong with it. That is not what we want to say. So I would have less of a problem with this if President Trump said, I'm going to commute the sentence and take away the remaining years, because I think overall this guy is a good guy. I would have less of a problem if he did that. I'm not saying if he's a good guy or a bad guy or anything like that, but I would have less of a problem with a commutation of his sentence than a straight up pardon.
Yeah, and I think there's already a thing with, and this is just an ugly part of war, but is the dehumanization of the people in the country you're inhabiting. Makes the business of war a little easier on the mind when you can dehumanize another group of people. And I feel like these were 2 human beings with lives who were murdered, and I feel like it's saying that doesn't matter, and their lives did matter. It does matter, and that Afghan people don't love each other any less than we do, don't love their families any less than we do. And I don't know. I just feel like that to me, there's something about that just, I don't know. Just
and
didn't feel
already,
good.
like having that sentence reduced, knowing that what happened, knowing the severity of what's behind the story, and already going on Fox News and acting like it's a fucking homecoming. Like, have some shame, dude. Like, your own platoon mates said that you were guilty. Like, they said that you were a straight up murderer. Have some fucking shame about yourself.
Yeah, just, quietly, if this is what happened, okay, quietly move on with your life. Don't make such a spectacle of it. And my heart also goes out to these soldiers, the soldiers who committed the murder, who killed these Afghans, because they were simply following an order. Again, I can ask you guys, when you're given an order, it's extremely difficult, especially as maybe a PFC or, a corporal, to say, oh, no, I'm just not going to do that.
And when they've been there and they've been taking fire and they've been, the whole thing is just really tough. And I was reading other stories where some of them have had a really difficult time with the things that happened.
I believe that, yeah.
And so, I don't know. I just, and like you said, you're like, well, it's, maybe keep quiet a little. Don't be so, it is a spectacle. And I feel like the whole thing is extremely, extremely political.
If anyone does, this is just so clearly the president is pandering to his base, and it just, maybe I'm jaded, maybe I'm in a different place now where everything I think that is occurring between now and November of next year is just completely driven to get him reelected. Which in this case, I think that's really horrible, because I think so often when you're talking about,
Con saying that as a conservative, like if you joined the show, I know that this comes off like what you would normally say as like a liberal thing. Cons is a conservative guy.
Right. But I think in this scenario, when you're talking about pardoning individuals who have been convicted of crimes, not just, in Golsteyn's case, didn't even go to trial yet, but this gentleman was convicted of this crime to then pardon it when it was just so egregiously black and white that what he did was wrong. I'll comfortably say that. What he did was wrong and is against the tenets that the Army stands for. So when I think pardon, sometimes I think of cases that maybe are a little ambiguous and could go either way. He was already convicted. Yeah. And it's so clearly black and white that this one doesn't really sit well with me.
Yeah, it's the whole thing's just heavy. And of course, as per usual, vet Twitter wilding out. Just going ham.
And I don't know about, I would say vet bro Twitter wilding out. I think that there's certain aspects that no matter what happens, that you're going to side on the military, like anybody military. And I told you earlier today, Kate, I wish that some of these folks that had such an unbelievable passion for everybody that's convicted of overseas crime had the same passion for the trans community whenever they were trying to get booted out of the military. If you're going to love the military, love it as a whole and everybody that it represents, then your ideology would be a little bit more solid. One other thing I want to mention about this entire case here is there is so many people who are extrapolating this to mean widespread ethical changes throughout the military. I don't think that is true on its face at all. I think that by and large, the people that wear the uniform of the United States are good people. Mm-hmm. I think that they're people who want to abide by the rule of law. We've all been in the position where we wanted to engage maybe whenever the rules of engagement didn't allow, because it's a scary fucking thing to be in a position and have somebody have an AK-47 pointed at you and there's nothing that you could do about it. But the fact of the matter is 99% of the veterans who are veterans are the ones that are wearing the uniform currently overseas don't pull the fucking trigger. And that means that we have the higher moral standard. We've got to keep that. And I don't think that most people will think in the back of their minds when they're in that position, oh, now I get to kill another human being who doesn't deserve it because I might get a pardon in 6 years.
And even
that's
in
not
this
going to go through people's brains.
Even in this story, you see soldiers doing the right thing when it was not an easy thing to do. So so like I think you're right. Like the military version of Fred Rogers, look for the helpers. Look for the people who are saying, no, sir, this is not what we should be doing. Look for the staff sergeant and the young sergeant who had the fucking nuts to go against somebody in his chain of command. That's something that's not being talked about enough. That shit is hard, man. Like to be an enlisted person going up against an officer and to make the report yourself that the person who signs my fitness report, my NCOERs, that person committed a war crime and murder, to be the one to turn him in, that is as ballsy as it gets.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm interested to see, as more every day, there's like every few hours, there's an update to these stories and to the reaction and to how people are feeling and what's next and what does it mean. So definitely something we'll be tracking on here. It is complicated. It's just definitely been a heavy thing. I know a lot of my military friends and I were texting about it over the weekend and everything. So,
and if there's one thing I can say,
I hope that if he does want to have a platform, I hope that he does good things for the veteran community. Become a better person. Be a person who is if you do get a platform, because he has a Twitter account, he's on Fox News, he's doing all these type of things. People that are in high-level positions are already sucking his dick about different stuff and acting like he's a goddamn war hero. I don't understand that at all. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to have that platform, please, please, please use it for good.